Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to explain the first artifact I've created for the service learning project. In collaborating, with Mrs. Trustman, she asked for a way to present students with scansion and also as a way to build class discussion. This first artifact here I've created is going to be a presentation on scansion, so it's going to address the first concern of the teacher. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to put the Prezi in full screen because that will shut down the screencast, but I'm going to use this little window here to hopefully be able to show you most of it, and hopefully it'll work this time. So what I've done is I've used Prezi to create this presentation, and I think Prezi is a great free software tool for teachers. Um, it's very similar to PowerPoint in that you would use it to make a presentation, but I think in many ways it's better than PowerPoint for capturing students' attention because it does come with beautifully pre-made themes like I've chosen here with the tree. But in that, there's also a lot of motion within Prezi. You can set frames within frames, frames outside of other frames. And so I think that movement kind of allows a sort of logical progression, maybe even appealing to different learning types, people that are kinetic learners. Uh, the movement and how slides relate to one another might be a good way for them to remember things better than, a linearly functioning PowerPoint presentation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly walk you through some of the high points of the presentation and to kind of give you an idea of the structure that I used. So, as I previously mentioned, I themed this with a theme that was available on Prezi for free. Uh, and I've titled it The Roots of Poetic Analysis, the Scansion. So, the argument that I'm presenting in this PowerPoint is that scansion is the first thing that you would want to do as soon as you get a poem and you're told to analyze it. It's the first series of steps that a student should take. And so by calling it the root, I think it's kind of a foundation and it was a nice way to theme it. But what you're going to see as we approach the first frame here is that there are different colors of text. You'll see the brownish text, which mainly presents information. The orange text and the blue text are used sort of interchangeably throughout the presentation, but their goal is either to denote more information that's kind of a subset of the black or brown text, and then I've also used it to sort of frame a series of questions. My goal for this presentation was to create not just something that throws information at students, but a presentation that sort of walks students through how to analyze a poem logically, following a logical series of steps. And I thought a cool way to do that would be almost conversational. So if you see italicized text, those are going to be questions that I would ask myself as I'm walking myself through a poem. So, with this next step, let's start with Kaganchen. Again, not the most formal language, but I think that helps students to relate to the presentation more. You've got a definition, and then in the blue, but this begs the question, what is a foot? So here I am asking myself a series of steps as to how I would try to guide myself through this presentation if I were learning it for the first time. So here you see the different colored text again, questions leading to the next slide. Here you can see some more of the theming that Prezi came pre-made with, which is great. In this next step here, I've done an example or a case study because Mrs. Trustman teaches an AP Lit class, and within AP Literature, poetry is obviously focused on, but more specifically, the poetry of Emily Dickinson is very widely taught. I know from my own personal experience, it shows up in the class and on the exam, so it would be cool for students and relevant for them to learn, I think, this skill set with her poetry. So I've chosen I Felt a Funeral in My Brain, which is a very typical Emily Dickinson poem. And what I've done is I've begun to break it down line by line. And as you can see, I keep asking myself questions. Here is a slide in which I'm presenting information to students, formal information. And then we're going to jump back into Dickinson's poem. And by jumping back into Dickinson's poem, we're going to break it down step by step and move on to the next step of scansion. The next step, which is looking at the pattern. So more information here. Again, we jump back to the poem to complete this step of analysis of what they've just learned. And then we're going to go back to more information, and then we're going to go back to applying it to the example. And that sort of forms the meat and potatoes of the presentation. Uh, now we're going to enter sort of a wrap up with a picture of Dickinson there, associations, and then sort of this wrap up slide here, which is going to again tie into the theme. It's the root of analysis. You've got another thing, and then this last step here. So there are a series of steps that students take when learning to analyze poetry. And the first step is scansion, which we've covered this entire presentation. These things, such as figurative language, tone, imagery, and dramatic situation, are topics that the teacher expressed that students should be familiar with at this point. So, one, we didn't really feel a need to include them in this presentation. But two, I think this kind of completes the thought process of here is a toolbox that students can use and pull out these tools in order to make poetry easier to comprehend for them. And here's sort of a wrap up slide, and that is the Prezi.